is Yerushalmi Peah. Oh, good evening, Baruch. I don't know if What?
I saw you. You still beat me.
Oh. I think you'll have to look in together because I don't have a spare Gemara tonight. Okay? Can you see?
Yeah.
These are the interruptions for Peah. In other words, you have to give a corner of each of the fields you own for Peah. How do you define separate fields? Hanachal, a riverbed. Hashlulis, a rivulet, which is smaller. V'derech hayachid, a private path. V'derech harabim, a public path. Actually, a private street or public street. Ushvil hayachid, and a private path. Ushvil harabim, and a public path. So long as those paths, which are smaller than streets, obviously, are kavua, they are fixed there. They're there both in the summer and in the winter. Habur, if you have a field which is lying fallow. Vanir, a field which is comprised of which has been plowed but not planted. V'zera acher, a field which has another type of produce other than the two fields which surround it. Echad kotzer l'shachas. I'm sorry. Zera acher keor kotzer l'shachas mafsik. Divrei Meir. Kotzer l'shachas is a very interesting case. Kotzer l'shachas is sometimes you could cut grain when it's not fully grown yet for your animals. It's less than a third of grown. So you cut it down as animal fodder. So if you say have a wheat field on one side, a wheat field on the other side, in the middle there's a plot of land which you now harvested for your animals, so even though it wasn't ripe, you harvested it, that does not constitute a harvest which generates a chiv of peah. And therefore, since that field in the middle is not chayiv in peah, therefore the two fields on either side of it are considered to be separate vis-a-vis their obligation to peah, and you have to give a separate peah on the one side and a separate peah on the one on the other side. When later in the year, after the grain is mature, you come to harvest the two side fields. Okay? Says the Gemara, to the middle field, which is used for the purpose of harvesting, for animal fodder, is not considered to be interruption unless you actually plowed it under. So if you plowed it under, then in that case, that's already considered to be after. In other words, let me expand that a little bit, just a little bit. After you harvested the middle field for animal fodder, if then you plowed it under, so then that indicates that it's not part and parcel of either of the fields, and therefore each of the fields on the flanks of that one will be separate vis-a-vis peah. However, if you allowed it to continue as it was after you harvested the fodder, so then all the fields which surround it are still considered to be linked, and you give peah from one of those fields on all those fields. Okay? Now, how do we know this is true? That you can't do from one field to another. Shneimar sodcha, singular, your field. It teaches us you cannot extract peah from one field and another field. Now, says one very interesting thing. Vena mechubar. We're talking about here interruptions in our Mishnah which are not artificially attached to the ground. Mechubar means artificially attached. What's a separation which is artificially attached to a ground? Give me a classic example. A wall. A wall is bricks attached to the ground, right? Did we mention a wall in our Mishnah? No. So these are all separations, interruptions, which are eino mechubar. They haven't been connected by their very nature. They're part and parcel of the topography, the landscape in that location, as opposed to something which is mechubar. So it says more, our Mishnah about eino mechubar. It's not things which have been attached, such as walls. Rather, these are mechubar. They were there the whole time. They're eino mechubar. They were never attached. They were there the whole time. Ve'eino mechubar. Because if there would have been here, if we were discussing a Mishnah even walls which are attached to the ground by human beings, then the halacha would be different. Then we would say afilu sadei ilon mafsik. The halacha is that all of these things mentioned in our Mishnah, which are natural topographic separations between fields, only separate between grain fields, but not between tree fields, not between orchards. Why? Because they're generally low down to the ground, all these separations. What's the only thing which constitutes a separation by orchards, by plots of trees? A mechubar separation, one which was added on by a human being. Okay? So far so good. So it says more on Mishnah again, it's about stuff which is Eino mechubar, wasn't attached, it was there to begin with. The Tanya Talmud, as we learned over there later on in the parak, Hakol mafsik l'zroim ve'eno mafsik l'ilon. Hakol mafsik l'zroim ve'eno mafsik l'ilon. Everything is an interruption vis-a-vis zroim, vis-a-vis grain fields. So any natural feature which comes between two fields is interrupts them, and you have to compare on each one. However, by Elon, there is nothing which interrupts one orchard from another orchard, elo geder, except for a fence. Hagader mechubar. Now, hagader, however, fence, it's mechubar. Ve'eno mechubar. It has elements of both. On the one hand, of course, it's humanly attached to the ground. On the other hand, it has elements of being automatic. How so? The Gemara will explain. It says, in Tamar mechubar, if you're going to say that it's considered to be completely like a man-made artifice, which it is, but that it's completely those halachas, so afilu ser koitish mafsik. It should even be mafsik if the foliage of the tree connects over the tree, and it's not like that. We'll see later in the parak how high a fence you need in order to be mafsik between trees vis-a-vis the Yerushalmi Peah if the foliage links the trees over the top of the fence. But a regular, normal-sized fence is not going to interrupt if the foliage interconnects above the fence. So therefore, says the Gemara, you can't say, even by this fence, which is mechubar, that it is the ultimate interruption between fields. There are cases where it doesn't interrupt, where there is foliage going over the top. Okay? So in Tamer mechubar afilu ser kotish ma'afsik. If you're going to say it's has complete elements of something which is a full-blown wall, so that it should interrupt even if there's foliage over the top. The thing as we learned, we learned that if there is literally sayar's hair, but here means foliage kotesh, meshing into each other, eino mafsik. Then in that case the wall is not interruption. You have to give I'm sorry. You give one peah on the entire orchard on both sides of the fence. Hadar Mara, this clearly teaches us that even a fence has elements of not being completely mechubar, not being a complete artificial and absolute separation. In Tamar, on the other hand, if you want to say, there's a typo here in the Gemara. I know about your Gemara. But it says in our Gemara, in Tamar mechubarhu. But it should say, in Tamar eino mechubarhu. The Rashi Siruleo put it in. So, because until now we were describing how a fence is not a complete separation. Right? Because it's even though it's mechubar, it doesn't separate where the foliage links over the top. However, the third line from the bottom. So, however, in Tamar ein mechubar, maybe you'll want to look again. There's a typo in the word. It should be eno mechubar. In Tamar ein mechubar, if you want to say that the offense is completely not an interruption, just like a natural obstruction, like we had on our Mishnah, is not a complete interruption except by grain fields, not by any type of tree. Then it should then we shouldn't have halacha, which we find later on, that if the foliage goes over on one side, then the fence interrupts. Now, what do we mean by that? We mean, where does a fence not interrupt two orchards? Where the foliage interlocks. What happens if you have a case, here's the fence, and you have trees going over the top, but they don't interlock. One goes like this, and the other tree is over here, back there, so they don't interlock. One tree is cantilevered over the top, but the other tree doesn't interlock with it. So in this we say the fence is a hefsek. The fence is a valid hefsek in this case. Where's the fence not valid hefsek? Where the trees mesh. Where one tree goes over the top, so then the fence is a valid hefsek. So this clearly tells us the fence has validity as a hefsek. So that's what the Gemara is about to say. In Tamar Eino Mechubrahu, Afilu Mitzarecha Mafsik. Now we have the halacha that if it goes over, for one side goes over, that a fence is an interruption. The Tani Imo Yoser Kodesh Mikan Mikane no Mafsik. Because when do we say that interlocking foliage is a problem? When it's kotesh, when it interlocks. Okay, but if only one side is coming over to the other side, and not vice versa, the other one tree is going over to the other side, but the other tree is at some distance. So in that case, we say that Eino Mafsik. I'm sorry, that Mafsik. With the Tani Imo Yoser Kodesh. Mikan Eino Mafsik. If it's interlocked, it's not Mafsik. Or Mitzarecha Mafsik. But if it's not interlocked, one goes over here and one over there, so then a fence is a hefsek. So basically, we're just saying, fence has contradictory properties. Sometimes the fence is a valid hefsek, such as where the trees grow on either side, or even if one tree extends over to the other side. And then the tree has the fence has the mila being mechubar, having been connected to the ground artificially. Sometimes even that is defeated. Where's that advantage defeated? Where the trees interlock, and where they interlock, even though the fence is mechubar, it has the property of eino mechubar, which means that it's like a natural obstruction, which is only an obstruction by grain and not by trees. Yes.
All you need is two interlocking trees, or you need the whole length of the fence.
We don't know that yet. I don't know yet. We'll see later in the parak, I hope.
By the way, if you see interlocking trees when you go up McCormick Road toward Green Bay Road, you have a north.
You have an awning of trees over the street. Yeah. So it's very pretty. But that's for Peah you'd have to take from the whole thing together. Okay, Rabbi Yossi b'Shem Rabbi Yossi b'Chanina. We're on top of Yudal from Aleph. For those who have the same kind of Gemara do. Rabbi Yossi b'Shem Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina said, "Hivrish Peah misal chaverta." What if you erroneously, as it were, set aside Peah from one field on another field where they are interrupted? Lo katra. It's not a valid act. Doesn't work. Now Rabbi Zera boy kami Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Zera asked him for Rabbi Yossi the following question. Niskaven, Rabbi Yossi is the same thing as Rabbi Yasa, who we'll see in a minute. Niskaven, liskos, min ha-meitzar. A person wanted to give Peah on his field from the meitzar. The meitzar is an elevation at the edge of the field. It's kind of a rim at the end of the field called the meitzar. So he wants to give Peah from the meitzar, from the elevated rim, on the field itself. Or vice versa, same halacha. Does it work or not? So it says the Gemara, V'sar Amina, I think it means the front door is locked. I think it's locked. Someone probably locked it. Yeah. Boy Rabbi Yossi, again, so Soramine didn't want to answer the question. Soramine literally means he slipped away. He didn't want to answer it. So says Gemara, okay, he tried. Why he tried to slip away? Mechalfa she'd say to Rabbi Yossi. That means Rabbi Yossi, when answer was unsure, that's the opposite of what we know to be the sheet of Rabbi Yossi. Literally, Rabbi Yossi exchanged his opinion. The Tzniyatamah we learned over there in another Mishnah or Brisa Mishnah. Modim Chachamim to concede Rabbi Akiva to Rabbi Akiva. Bizarre sheves ochara when you plant sheves or some type of grass seed or a chayda mustard seed. B'sholosh mekomos in 3 different places. They had to give 3 different payas. You can't give payah from one on the other. Kinimas Nisin. What is that mission talking about? It's talking about Shevetz b'Shloshim Mekomos and Chayda b'Shloshim Mekomos. And Shmuel Amar, why can't you compare from one to the other? Because they don't grow at the same rate. The first patch grows quicker than the last patch, and therefore you have to give on each patch separately because they're different rates of growth. Rabbi Yasser b'Shem Rabbi Yochanan said, why can't you compare from patch to patch? And they should darkly zora arugos, because they're planted in little patches. They're planted little patches, then they're distinct. So we see clearly that he says the Rabbi Yasser holds their name Rabbi Yochanan, that if you have distinct patches, you can't compare from one on the other. So here too, he should hold clearly that if you want to compare from the Meitzar, from the rim of the field on the field itself, or vice versa, it shouldn't work. Why is he hemming and hawing and hesitating to answer our question here? That's Gemara's problem. So it says, I'll tell you. Pshita leishu mafsik. Of course he holds it just like little patches in the same field are distinct vis-a-vis Peah. Certainly holds that the stuff which you put on, grow on the Meitzar is distinct as well. Lo tzurcha, that wasn't his question. His question was, lo tzurcha de lo. It wasn't his question whether it's proper or not. It's definitely not proper. However, his problem was kach mishum peah lo kach. Let's say he did this improperly, as it were. He left peah on the meitzar for the field, or peah on the field for the meitzar. Is it still kadosh mishum peah or not kadosh mishum peah? And that Rabbi Yasser didn't want to answer. He didn't want to answer whether you shouldn't have done it, but if you did it, is it okay or is it not okay? He didn't want to answer. So Rabbi Yeshua responded, he frish peah misada chaverta. If you set aside peah from one field on another, lo kadsha, it doesn't become kaddish at all. Ushama meimar, you can hear from what he said that this is true afilu meitzar, even for the stuff which is sitting on the border. In other words, the border on the field have no real affinity to each other, and therefore if you took a peah from one on the other, not only is it improper, it doesn't work, and the stuff which you set aside as peah is not proper peah.
What the problem is?
Different heights.
You're still going to give 1/60th, right?
It doesn't matter. It's be 1/60th per field, not 1/60th of his total produce for that year. So it has to be, if you have a field up here and another field down here, this field needs its own pay and that field needs its own pay. That's higher, separate, it's distinct. Yeah. So the same thing, even if this is not a full field, but just the rim around that field. Same halacha. Yes, that's what a meitzar is. Okay? It's a border which is slightly raised or elevated.
Which is from one field.
In this case, you have to give from this field and separately from here.
But how many 10 fields and you give them from 10 fields?
That's correct. Unless they're contiguous and the same produce, etc., etc.
You're giving out on one field, so he's giving less. That's what's happening, that's basically.
We're not concerned about amounts here.
So what are we concerned with?
We're concerned that you should be Yotzei Locha Peah, which has to be on each and every field. No. The amounts are all the Rabbanan. No, that's not what we're concerned. We're not concerned with cheating here. Okay? Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yosef Chanina Amar, a certain plant which has very, very deep roots, which if you have it between the two fields, so then it interrupts the pair from one to the other. Rav Chisda boy, Bo'en Chilak Yoshua Sa'aretz, is that the case that are those the chatzuvos with which Yoshua divided Eretz Yisrael? No, instead of making fences, he planted these trees everywhere where there was a boundary. Says the Gemara, also Rabbi Chanina M'Shem Rav Chisda, Rav Chanina came and said Rav Chisda, correct. Bohem Tichem Yoshua Sa'aretz. With them, Yoshua made the borders of Eretz Yisrael. Okay, let's go back to our Mishnah. Shlulis, not literally, figuratively. Shlulis koshu masheches nachal. A rivulet Scratch that. Shluitz koshi mosheches. A rivulet, as long as it's flowing, is an interruption between grain fields, and each one needs its own peah. Nachal, a riverbed, avo bisha edom moshech, even though it's not flowing, it doesn't have flowing water. Nonetheless, mikeva, it still interrupts. Now, a new question. Mikeva detina derech hayochid. Once it said in our Mishnah that a private road interrupts, and there's a pay, derech Rabbi matzur chat meimar. Look, why do you have to mention derech Rabbi matzur tzurcha? What's the need? On a meimar, why do I have to mention to you? Says the Gemara, afilu derech Rabbi eno mafsik li'ilon elo goder. You're right. In our Mishnah, it's obvious. If derech hayochid is not mafsik for pay, certainly derech Rabbi. Why do we write the derech Rabbi? So why do we bother writing explicitly that derech Rabbi is exempt from peah? To teach us, or not exempt, but that interrupts in peah. To teach us that the next Mishnah's lesson. The next Mishnah's lesson is that's only true about a derech that even a derech Rabbi is not interruption for trees. What's the only possible interruption for trees? Only a high fence. So therefore, what we're saying is, by bringing down derech Rabim over here, we'll say this derech Rabim is a nice interruption for grain fields, that you have to compare from one grain field and pay out from the other grain field, but it's not an interruption at all when it comes to trees. Okay? Says the Gemara, once it mentions private paths, why is it to mention the public paths? Certainly, if a private path is interruption between fields in terms of path, certainly a public path. So it says the Gemara again, you don't need this except for the Sefer. What's the Sefer?
Maybe only in that case it will work, because what she's doing is taking her ksuba, and then she's leaving, and she has no more dealings with the house.
Lo tzisa kavua b'mosa chama v'ena kavuyosek shamid. You need it because the Mishnah elucidated at the end of its discussion here that when is the derech harabim a hefsek, even a derech harabim is only hefsek if it's year round, if it's there 365 days a year. But if it's one which doesn't exist in the winter because it gets too muddy, whatever the case may be, then it's not hefsek. So we had to mention Shvil Rabin said that even though many people walk there, if there are times of year in which it falls into disuse, so therefore at those times it's not considered to be a proper, the whole year it's not considered to be hefsek because it has to be in proper use the entire year through and through.
And what about a nachal that dries up in the summertime?
So we're going to learn that. Well, actually, we did learn that. A shluis has to be a sluice which dries up is not good enough. A riverbank which dries up is good enough.
Even though they both dry up.
Right, but a riverbank has greater topographical features.
So like a wadi.
Mm-hmm. Nachal is a wadi in Aramaic. That's right. Okay, says Rav Omar. Rav says, with 4 lines to the bottom, read out from Rav. Rav Omar bore a fallow field, veneer, a field which has just been plowed this year, not planted. Base rova, they interrupt between two other fields if they are a base rova in size. Vizer acher, if however between two fields you planted a field with any other type of seed, afilu koshu, then you don't need the shiur of 3 plow widths, or 3 plow furrows. Oh no, sorry, I'm skipping down to Rabbi Yochanan already. Sorry. Let me start that over again. Ramar bur veneer base rova bur veneer base rova. If you want to make an interruption based on a fallow field or a field which has been already plowed, so then it has to be at least a quarter of a kav in dimension in order to be a interrupting field. Vizer acher, however, if you want to make it interrupted based on the fact that one of your fields has a different crop in it, I feel kosher, no matter how small that crop, it already is it can be served as an interruption between the two fields. Now, Rabbi Yochanan Bur, Rabbi Yochanan says if you have a field which you want to lay fallow, veneer, you have a field which you want to plow, v'zera acher, or a field which is comprised of different types of produce, and the two grain fields on either side of it. So then, Rabbi Yochanan are in all these cases.
If the ratio talking about where she sold it for less, and then in the same
Rabbi Yochanan bur veneer v'zera acher b'shlosha tol klomim. In order to create an interruption, you have to have a field which is large enough to cover 3 plow widths shel pasiach at the initial beginning of the plowing in the field. Whatever that is, I don't know exactly. Ma'u polik? Do Rabbi Yochanan and Rav argue? Because Rav said you need to have the interruption, for instance, by a fallow field of a full base rova. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan said all you need is 3 plow lengths, not more than that. So says Maro Ma Polik, says Maro no. Madamar Rav, where did Rav say you need a larger shiur in order to serve as an interruption? B'chiyuv Peah, by that which is required in Peah. Meaning that we're talking about a field which has the potential to become a Peah, and therefore needs a larger, which are the fallow fields and the plowed fields. Therefore, in order for them to be dividing between the surrounding fields, they have to be of larger dimensions. Now what you said is you need only 3 plow lengths of this stuff in order to make an interruption. Bipotter Peah. It's talking about where in the middle there was growing stuff which is exempt from Peah. So therefore, it's the stuff exempt from Peah, so therefore you have to have only smaller interruptions, the 3 furrow breadths, and no more than that. Okay, Vatani, didn't we learn Bor Veneer Chayim Peah that you know what? Before we go further, let me summarize outside where the machlokas is. Rav and Rabbi Yochanan have the following machlokas. It seems Rav said we have a fallow field or a field which is being plowed that year but not planted. In order for that to be interruption between 2 flanking fields, has to be a base rova in size. That's the size it has to be. If you're making interruption between 2 fields based on another type of growth, other than what's growing in the surrounding fields, even a kosher is mafsik. Rabbi Yochanan seemed to say in all these cases, Rabbi Yochanan seemed to say in all these cases, regardless of what you're doing, what the type of interruption is, whether it's you're leaving a field fallow, or you're just plowing, or the third option being having a zera acher, in all these cases you need 3 rows of plow lengths in order to be an interruption, in order to say each one is its own separate payoff. Okay? Now the Gemara asked if this is considered to be a thank you. I don't know if you've noticed, but I am one of the rare people who has capacity to fall asleep even when he's talking. I also have the capacity to fall asleep standing up. This is something which was developed after many years of being in yeshiva on sleep deprivation. So the fact that I'm standing up is no guarantee that I won't fall asleep even when I'm talking. But if I do, you can just snap your fingers and I'll snap to attention. So in any event, so the Gemara tries. So the Gemara tries to reconcile again Rabbi Yochanan and Rav. And the Gemara's first attempt to reconcile that successful attempt is that when the Rabbi Yochanan say all you need is 3 furrows and not more, so Rabbi Yochanan said that that which Rabbi Yochanan said you need 3 furrows and a kosher is not sufficient. Rav said a kosher is sufficient is because Rav is speaking about where the stuff in the middle is stuff which is exempt from Peah. Let's say stuff in the middle, for argument's sake, is chves, tomatoes. Okay? So tomatoes, I'm not sure if they actually are both from Peah, but let's say. So if the stuff in the middle is a row of tomatoes between two fields of grain, so then already that's a valid hefsek. You don't have to be, you have to be separated from each field Peah separately. However, let's say the hefsek in the middle is something which is chayav in Peah, such as you have two wheat fields on either side of a barley field. So in that case,
the opposite. He said
exact opposite. Sorry. According to Rabbi Yochanan, according to Rav, if the field in the middle is made up of some other substance which is chayav in Peah, then no matter how small that strip is in the middle, it's considered to be hefsek, even if it's less than 3 furrows wide, because it's considered to be a completely different type, not neutral. It's hostile because it's different and still chayav in Peah. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, in that Rabbi Yochanan speaking not about the same case, he wasn't arguing, speaking about a different case. He's speaking about a case where you had on either side a substance which is chayav in Peah, and in the middle you had a substance which is exempt from Peah. Since it's exempt from Peah, it's neutral. If it's neutral and you want it to be a hefsek, it can't just be a strip of a mashu. What does it have to be? At least 3 furrow lengths. Okay? Again, something which is neutral requires more of a hefsek than something which is chayav in Peah but is a different substance. Okay? It's reasonable, right? Okay, that's one answer. So it says the Gemara, is that what Rabbi Yochanan speaking about? Sorry about Petur Peah. He says, when do you need 3 furrows width when it's neutral, so which is exempt from Peah? How can you say this? What time did we learn? Bur v'nir chayovin b'peah. It says that bur and near, fields which are fallow, and fields which are exempt, which are plowed just for that year but not planted, they're chayav in Peah. They need the hefsek of that which is chayav in Peah. Ooh. Because theoretically, if something would grow there, you'd have to give Peah. So if that's the case, there must be a L'chukas Rav and Rabbi Yochanan. Because Rabbi Yochanan said, what's the shiur by bur and near? The shiur by bur and near, according to Rabbi... You're right. Rabbi Yochanan, it's 3 lengths. But what's the shiur according to Rav? In bur and near? Much larger. A base rova.
How much bigger is that?
A lot. 4 times bigger. So if that's the case, which is... It seems to be a machlokas. Because according to Rav, if it's a bur or near, you need to have a base rova. I mean, you have to have 4 times as much of a hefsek as the 3 furrows. Yet according to Rabbi Yochanan, it seems that he's saying even though bur and near are chayav in Peah, nonetheless all you need is 3 tlomim, not more than that. So it's a contradiction there. Rav and Rabbi Yochanan see to you arguing. Says more they're not arguing either. There. I mean, Madamar Rav, that which Rav said is besada beinonis. By a regular sized field, you can afford a greater interruption. So we make you have a greater expansive interruption in order to give 2 payas. Madamar Rabbi Yochanan. Madamar Rabbi Yochanan. That which Rabbi Yochanan said is b'chamishim al shtayim, but small field, which is only 50 by 2 amos, 100 square amos. So in that case, if we make him make a whole base rova of interruption, he could have no field left to plant. So therefore, we tell him all he has to make an interruption is a little bit, only 3 furrows legs. So it came out that Rav and Rabbi Yochanan don't argue at all. That which Rav said that you need to have a full interruption by bur and near is where you have a large field, so you can spare the expense. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan is talking about a small field where you can't spare spare that expense and expanse, and therefore all you have to leave is 3 furrow breadths. Whereas according in the other case, the case where you planted for actual grain in the middle, there too there is no machlokas either. Rav is talking about a case where you planted, so to speak, a hostile fruit in the middle, one which is chayiv and peah but has a different chiyuv because of different reasons, in which case it in and of itself, any most minute strip is already a hefsek, where it has Rabbi Yochanan is talking about a case where you planted in the middle something which is neutral, something which is exempt from peah. And since it's exempt from peah, so therefore in that case, you have to have a minimal separation of at least 3 furrow breadths. Okay? Says the Gemara, Rabbi Zera, B'Shem, Rabbi Lezer. Said Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Shneim, Amru Davar Echad. Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda both said the same thing. What did they say? The Kamad Meir Omer, Hakotza l'shachas mafsik. Just like Meir said in our Mishnah, that if you harvest between your 2 wheat fields, fields for animal fodder, then it interrupts the 2 wheat fields, and you have to consider pay on each one. So too, Rabbi Meir says, Keren Meir Omer, Chiyuv b'peah mafsik. If you have, I skipped. I'm sorry. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kotzel Shachas Mafsik. Rabbi Yehuda says that if you harvest in the middle for animal fodder, it's an interruption. Kamad Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Hachiyuv b'peah mafsik. Just like Rabbi Yehuda says, that which is hypothetically shaykh to peah is an interruption because Kotzer l'shachas can theoretically come to peah, even though l'maisa now you're harvesting it early. Ken Rabbi Meir Omer, Chiyuv b'peah mafsik. So Rabbi Meir says that if you have something which can come to peah, you have Ken Rabbi Yehuda Omer? I have Ken Rabbi Meir Omer. Well, first it's Ken Rabbi Yehuda, then it's Ken Rabbi Meir. Okay? Just like Ken Rabbi Yehuda, Kotzer Shachas Mafsik, just like Rabbi Yehuda says that you harvest for fodder, which is also can come potentially to chiyuv, that you're chayiv. So too, Kimar Rabbi Yehuda Mer chiyuv b'peah mafsik. So too, just Rabbi Yehuda says that which is chayiv peah is an interruption. Kiremeir Mer chiyuv b'peah mafsik. So too, Rabbi Meir holds if you have something which is a chiyuv and peah in the middle, it's an interruption as well. Where's the case? V'hei ashkichon the Rabbi Meir Omer chiyuv peah mafsik. The Rabbi Meir says that if you have in the middle a strip which is susceptible to peah, that it's an interruption between the 2 fields. In the following case, like we learned in a brisa, achla guvai. If your field was not harvested properly, rather was eaten by a locust. Kirsamuna malim, it was chopped down by ants. A-N-T-S. Right? They came and they ate through all your stalks. Kishivarto ruach. Your stalks are broken by the wind. Obehema. Your stalks were snapped by animals. Petura, in that case, you don't have to give peah, because it's not a true katsir. It's not a true harvest. However, everybody agrees it's still the brayso. Im charash mafsik. If you harvested, then it's an interruption. Im lo charash eno mafsik. If you didn't harvest, it's not an interruption. Now, what do we mean by that? We mean that you have in the middle of your field an area which has been eaten by ants. Is that an interruption between the 2 flanks of the field? Says Martin, no. When is it an interruption? Only if you harvested over that middle area after it was eaten by the ants. So it says the Gemara, if that's the case, Mani Akomodi, when it says everybody agrees that only if you harvest, if you plow, then that becomes an interruption. If not, it doesn't become an interruption. Lav Rabbi Meir, is it not Rabbi Meir? And what's Rabbi Meir's logic? Hada Amara. The reason why you have to plow that area, in addition to having had it eaten by ants, etc., is Ivneshu Pitoter Peah, because that area, since it wasn't harvested by human beings, ants harvested it, or animals trod on it, or whatever the case may be. So it's an area which is potter from Peah, because it's not Ketzir. So therefore, it says the Gemara, Rameir, there requires you, in order to make it a valid interruption between the two flanks of your field, that you plow the area. But normally, if the interruption is made up of something hostile, as I said before, so which is chayav and peah, but of a different type, so in that case, that's an interruption by its very nature. And you don't even have to plow it under in order to make an interruption between the two fields. Automatically, that different vegetation in the middle, which is chayav and peah, separates field number 1 from field number 2. Okay?
He's plowing it under. He sets fire to it.
Same problem. Fire, I assume, would be saying like plowing. So it says the Gemara, again, Hadamra teaches me Neshu Poter Peah. Why do you have to plow it under? Because it's exempt from Peah, because it wasn't a proper harvest. But if it's required to have Peah, I feel a little harsh, even if you didn't plow, it's mafsik, it's an interruption. This is like we said over there, or like we learned over there. What did we learn over there? Omer Rabbi Yudon, who's Rabbi Yehuda, said, Emasai, when you exempt from Peah, Bismanch, or this Mishnah is also has reference to the Chodesh. When you're allowed to harvest before the Korban Omer, just like when are you chayav and exempt from Peah, Amosai, when is that true? When you started harvesting your crop before it became a third grown, so it wasn't yet fully fit for human consumption. It's only fit at this point for animals. So if that's the case, if that's when you started harvesting, then you're exempt from Peah, and you're allowed to harvest that before Korban Omer. But if it already is a third grown, you're not allowed to harvest it without taking Peah. Why? Because it's already more than a third grown. And you're also not allowed to harvest it before the Korban Omer. Why? Because you're not allowed to harvest any Chodesh, any new grain until after the Korban Omer. So says the Gemara. Once you started to be kosher, chayav and peah. The davar shu chayav, and this is all part of the statement of Rabbi Yudon. The davar shu chayav and peah mafsik. That which is chayav and peah is mafsik. So he separates the two, and each one now has their own independent chiyuv in peah. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Zera boy. Rabbi Zera asks a shayla. Kamad Rabbi Yehuda Amar. We know that Rabbi Yehuda said a very interesting thing. Do we pass like him even according to Rameir? Rabbi Yehuda said, Hischil, I'm the top now of Yud Beis Amrav. Hischil ad shaloi v'yashlish. If you started harvesting before the Korban Omer was brought, and it was okay because it was not yet a third grown. But then while you were harvesting, it became a third grown. Similarly by us, you started harvesting when it was exempt from Peah, because it's less than a third grown. But you harvested into the season when it already became a third grown. What's your status then? So Rabbi Yehuda, we know what it says. It says, Hitchil ad shaloi v'yashlish. You began harvesting before it was the third grown. V'afiloi v'yashlish, even then when it becomes a third grown, pater min leket min shichon peah. Since you started beheter, you don't have to give leket shichon peah on it. V'chein Rameir, does Meir say the same thing? Hischil ad shaloi v'yashlish, v'afiloi v'yashlish. If you began before it was a third grown, and then it became a third grown, pater min leket shichon peah is examined leket shichon peah? And the Gemara does not answer the question. So it comes out, because as Yerushalmi, you don't bother answering questions all the time. So it comes out a very interesting thing. That where in the middle you harvest, you have a location which is potter from Peah, because it's type vegetable which is not chayav in Peah. So then that interruption is good even if it's a kosher. Even if it's a kosher. No matter how small. However, the exception to that rule is if it's something which is... Did I say that right? Let me start that over again because I confused myself. If you have an object which is no, I didn't say it right. I said it wrong. If you have in the middle of a field, you have a field of wheat over here and a field of wheat over here and a barley strip in the middle. So that's a hefsek lepeah. A chiyuv in the middle in peah of another type is like a hostile takeover, and that divides and conquers the two fields separately, and therefore each field now has to bring its own peah. If that which is in the middle is exempt from peah, such as the stuff which was harvested by the ants, or a vegetable which is exempt from peah, in that case, I say that it's only a hefsek if it has a certain shiur, 3 tlamin. If it doesn't have that shiur, it's not a hefsek. And therefore, I can take peah from one side on the other. There's a separate shiur, which is, once you had the concept of ptur peah, you started harvesting before it became a third grow, which is patur at that point. Can I then, later on, when it becomes chayev, continue harvesting subsequently? And we don't come with a resolution in terms of without giving peah. So I don't have a resolution in terms of what the shita of Rabbi Meir is. According to Rabbi Yehuda, yes, we can continue. According to Rabbi Meir, we don't know. Okay, let's go further. Mishnah halacha base. Yes.
He has a field.
Yeah.
Slightly divides it up to small.
Yeah.
Divides it by
Hostile things. He has barley between wheat fields.
Doesn't have to have a big amount of land in between.
I wanted one big shirt for 6.
Why would he want to go in that respect? 1/3. I don't understand. Kids made a parade. You have one row of tomatoes. So he can divide his field up into something small and have one row of tomatoes separating each one. And that way you can still have different fields. But
Why would he want to have different fields? The whole Gemara has a basic question here, which is bothering me. But since I'm not a farmer, I really don't expect to know the answer. Why would you not want to combine all your fields and give one pay? It's probably easier to get pay from everything. So therefore, it's a little bit difficult. The whole concept that he's going to have interruptions in the middle of his field. Why would he ever want to have this? Yeah, but you're not talking about alternating. So maybe that's what you're saying. So in other words, the interruptions by virtue of the fact that he's alternating crops. That could be. Okay. Says the Mishnah further. You have a irrigation canal, and you can't harvest both sides at once. It says interruption between the two sides. Any hill which you can hoe, it's the middle of the field, your field, you have a hill. As long as you can hoe it with a hoe, even though a cow cannot go over that hill because it's too steep, the hill is not an interruption. Again, any hill which you can work with your hoe, regardless of whether a cow can pass over it or not, is considered to be a non-interruption. It doesn't interrupt one side of your field from the other. Okay? So, now the Gemara says, It's animal chubar. It wasn't connected by human beings. If it was mechubar, it would be bad. Then it would be a fence, and a fence is mafsik and zroim. This is animal chubar, and that's not. It's not mafsik. That's why it's not mafsik. Okay. Says more havum boy memar. They want to say below pligin that there's no machlokas in our Mishnah. Well, when in the beginning of Mishnah it says, Amas my work now, which can't be harvested at once. Rabbi Yehuda Rav Second says interruption. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabban are the same thing. There's no machlokas here. Ashkelon's telling the problem is they found a brisa which they had to reconcile with that statement. The brisa says, a permanent irrigation canal is an interruption. It sounds like, from this, it sounds like not every irrigation canal is an interruption, but only a permanent one. So they want to say, for that which says, that Rabbi Yehuda said, what's considered to be an interruption when you have an irrigation canal? Or maybe when you stand on one side of the canal, you know, I read something. I mispunctuated again. Tani, let me start with you tomorrow again. Have a boy member that wanted to say below plea and there's no machlokas. Ashkelchos, they found the Brisa says Tani hamayim akvuim areisim avsekes. They wanted that if it's a specific irrigation canal which is permanent, then it's interruption. Otherwise, it's not an interruption. All right, that's still not necessarily an argument on our Mishnah. That doesn't generate an argument in our Mishnah, I should say. However, having boy meimar, they wanted to say minmad amar Rabbi Yehuda, from that which Rabbi Yehuda said, boy mitziro echo be'eni yochel liksar mitzad sheni. When is it true that the canal is an interruption? When you stand on one side of the canal, you can't reach over to the other side of the canal and harvest. But what about if he can stand in the middle of the canal? And then he can harvest one side with one hand and another side with the other hand like this. So what about in that case? Is that hefsek or not? Ain't no mafsik. It's not a mafsik. So that's what they derived from this statement of Rabbi Yehuda. If that's the case, Ashkech Tani Upoli. They found the price which argues.
There's no Eino here.
What? I don't know, it's going to work. Look at the next line. Ashkoch Tani Upoli, they found a price which argues in that, which says, if you stand in the middle and you can harvest from each side, mafsik. Then it is hafsik, so it's a contradiction. The first price said that if you stand in the middle and can harvest from on each side, ain't no mafsik, right? And here it says, if you stand in the middle, go like this and like this, it's still a mafsik. As long as you can't reach over from one side to the other, it's a hafsik, so it's a contradiction. Alright, so I'm not sure what the... What? Yeah, I don't know. It's not a contradiction according to him. I don't know. I don't know. All right, I'm not going to try and figure it out now. It's late. But anyway, there is a clear-cut machlokas here. Again, let's see this machlokas. This Brisa says here, Ashkeltani Poli Goy Omer Be'emtza V'Koytzer Mikana Mikana. If you stand in the middle, you can harvest on each side of the river. It's mafsik. It's an interruption. When is it not an interruption? Only if mitzad echad. Only if you stand on one side and cannot reach to the other side, then eno mafsik. Then it's not an interruption.
She has a little break.
That means it's wider.
That means it's wider.
So
now I see.
It should be an interruption.
Now I see why it changes the girsa.
It's not nami gave kedushin. So we learn the same exact thing in kedushin. As far as asking why we have to have this.
No. I read it wrong. That's right. Okay. Let's see again the machlokas here. Are you leaving?
No.
Oh, almost finished. Let's see again the machlokas.
She was there.
They usually run late from downstairs. Man madam. Let's say again the machlokas from man madam Rabbi Yehuda. For that which Rabbi Yehuda said, when is the interruption? When he's standing on one side and cannot see the other side, cannot be close on the other side. But if you can stand in the middle and you can harvest on both sides, then it's not a hefsek. Ashkech Tani Poli found a price which argues, which says, if you stand in the middle, you can harvest on both sides, it's mafsik. Because you need to stretch out both hands. When is it not a hefsek? Only if you could stand on one side and reach to the other side. And reach to the other side. If you can stand on one side and reach to the other side, ain't no mafsik. Right, it's on one side and you can do it. So here it's clearly machlokas. They wanted to say it's no machlokas, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan. That everybody agrees, whatever the standards are by irrigation canals, it's universal. They all agree to the same standards. So, and even though we found some brisa which said that it has to be a permanent canal, we dismissed that and we said everybody can agree it has to be a permanent canal. But this clearly throws us off, because there's one brisa which says that when you stand like this, so it is a hefsek. Another brisa says when you stand like this, it's not a hefsek. And through the same vein, there's one brisa that says that when are they connected? The first brisa which says like this is not a hefsek says, when is it a hefsek? When is it a hefsek if this is not a hefsek? The only time it's a hefsek is when you can't reach from one side to the other at all, right? The brisa which says that this is a hefsek says, when is it not a hefsek? That this is hefsek says, when is it not hefsek? Only if you can go like this from one side to the other. Okay? So it's clearly a machlokas as to the guy who's standing in the middle.
How many cases is there?
It's 3 cases, right? 3 cases where he can go, where he can reach from one side to the other side, where he can only reach when he's standing in the middle of the river, and when he can't reach from one side to the other side. So where he can reach from one side to the, you just clarified it very much. Where he can reach from one side to the other side, so everybody agrees that that's connected. Where he can't reach from one side to the other, so where when he stands in the middle, he can reach from one side to the other side, so that's the machlokas. When it's impossible to reach from one side to the other side, so everybody agrees that that's obviously a hefsek. Okay? So it says the Gemara, Chia Barad B'Shem Rishon Melachis said, Hoyer Sham Sela Pnei Kol Sadeh. What if there's in the middle of his field he has a rock, an outcropping of rock in the middle of his field? Is that a hefsek? Im Okeru as a machreshem besides have a noisin besides that. If in order to get over that rock you have to take up the plow and physically raise it and move it and take it over the rock to the other side, mafsik, then that rock is an interruption in terms of peah. If it's one side, meaning you don't have to raise your plow, you can just like glide the plow over it in a certain way. I'm not sure exactly how, but you didn't have to literally physically carry the plow over. You just slide it across. So then, Eno Mafsik, it's not an interruption. Says the Gemara, Vatani Vatani. We find this in a brisa as well. The brisa says, Madrego Shengavos Asar Tzvachim. You have steps, which are terraces, and you have terraces inside a mountain, right? So Madrego Shengavos Asar Tzvachim. If there's a 10 tefach break between each one is 10 tefachim higher than the other, knows the peah l'koach zvachs. You have to give peah for each one. It's a kasha, not a raya. I'm sorry. If there are less than 10 tefachim between each one, so then you have to give. Then you give peah from one of the terraces and all of the terraces. Ask the Gemara, fine. So it's less than 10 tefachim, but still. Besides that, Gemara asks, even if it's less than 10 tefachim between each terrace, you're still going to have to pick up the plow and put it on the next level. So how can you say if there's less than 10 tefachim between each terrace that you can give peah for one terrace on the other terrace? It shouldn't be true. What? It's to do with the height. You ever been in Israel and see how they plant terraces on the side of the mountain?
How wide did it have?
What difference does it make how wide they are? It makes a difference about how high each one is from the other. So,
If they don't,
so that's a kasha. Seems here, even if they don't connect, as long as there's a 10 tefachim between them, it's okay. It's a kasha. So it says the Gemara, nonetheless, you have to lift off your plowshare. So it says, you're right. The truth is, even if it's less than 10, if you have to pick up the plowshare to go from level to level, they're interrupted. So why is 10 tefachim mentioned? That's very unfortunate. 10 tefachim is not true. So the reason why I mentioned Asara is Mishum Sufa, because of the Seifa. Shemayu Roshi Madregos Muravim Shunose Meyechad, because it says at the end of the Brisa that it says at the end over there that even if they're 10 tefachim high from each other, I would say there's 10 tefachim here and 10 tefachim, the difference. But if there's a way to get around and go from one to the other, so then they're considered to be connected. Then it is connected. So therefore, what it's saying is that if there's a way in which the madregas connect, even if at one point they're 10 tefachim high, they're still considered to be connected. So we mentioned 10 tefachim not because when it's less than 10 tefachim they're automatically connected. It's not true. Even when there's less than 10 tefachim between levels, we need to ascertain that we can take the plow from one level to the other. What it means is that if they're connected at some point further down, even if now there's a distance of 10 tefachim between the two of them, they're still considered to be connected, and you can take pair from one on the other. Okay? Do they come upstairs? Did you notice as the women came upstairs? Coming out? Okay, so we have a couple more minutes. We'll just finish the next couple lines. Let's just finish the Amud base. Hakom Mafsikin Lizroim. Everything is interruption for Zroim. Beino Mafsik Lilon is not interruption for trees. This we saw at the beginning of the evening. Elo Goder. The only interruption by trees is a fence. V'mayosei Kotish. If there is interlocking foliage on top of the fence, Eino Mafsik. You can't, even a fence is not a hefsek. El Nois and Peah Chasako, you give pay on everything together. Ulcharuvin. Caribs have very extensive root systems. So Kol Roin says that anytime two caribs are in visual sight lines of each other, you give payer from one on both of them. Omer Gamliel said, no, you can be Saba, nosim pe'achas l'zeisim shulam mechol ruach. If they had a whole bunch of olive trees on some side of the town, so they would give payer from one of those olive trees on all of them and all the entire environs. Ucharuvi Kol Roin said that by caribs they would go by as many as could see each other. In other words, even if they're great distances, because of the extensive root systems. Not only if you could see each other, if you had a carib over here and one all the way on the other side of the city, you'd still give one pay on both of them, because the roots go all the way under the city, from carib to carib. Don't ask me, that's what it says. They connect underneath the ground, right? Says the word mak kotesh. What does kotesh mean? Kaleba machtesh, like a mortar in a pestle. So it meshes one into the other. Yankel, she's waiting for you. Kaleba machtesh. Is that what it means? Okiko kotesh al gabei goder, or is it like that they mesh on top of the fence? So what is it? What's the question? Gemara's question is like this. Does it what's the tree what are the tree's branches pushing into? Are they pushing into each other, interlocking, or are they pushing into the fence? You understand the difference? One is with Shiloh, when we say that the interlocking trees, we learned they're interlocking, Seir Kotish, that the trees, the foliage interlocks. But maybe Kotish means that the foliage hits the fence on each side. Not that the foliage interlocks over the fence, but it hits the fence. Just like a mortar hits the pestle, maybe the tree is hitting the fence, right? So like the mortar and the pestle, or kotesh al gabi there, or that they're interlocking themselves, they're hitting each other over the fence. Ain, for now which it says Seir Kodesh, say hairs are hit each other. Ain Agoder Kodesh. It's not that it's hitting the fence. Hadar Marah, that's which it says Kodesh Agape go there. They're interlocking above the fence, not that they're hitting the fence itself. We will stop here for the